The day the HOA president tried to evict me from my own land, she showed up in a pearl-white SUV and a blazer that cost more than my chainsaw. I was standing behind my cabin, stacking firewood, sweaty, dirty, minding my own business, and there she was like a tax audit in lipstick. You ever have somebody walk onto your property so sure of themselves you almost start checking whether you accidentally died and left them your estate in the will? Because that was the look on Cheryl Whitmore's face. I wiped my hands on my jeans, came around the side of the porch, and found her standing near the edge of my lot with a folder tucked under one arm and those oversized sunglasses still on, even though the trees were throwing shade all over the place. She called my name like she was summoning room service. "Mr. Barnes, we need to talk now." I leaned against the porch rail and said, "Well, you found me. What's the occasion, Cheryl?" Now, Cheryl was the president of the Silver Pines HOA, and when I say president, I mean queen, judge, preacher, and small-town dictator rolled into one very polished woman. Silver Pines sat about 2 miles south of my place. I was not in Silver Pines. Never had been, never wanted to be. That was the whole point of buying my cabin 10 years earlier. I wanted quiet. I wanted trees, water, wind, and the kind of silence you only get when nobody nearby feels entitled to tell you what color your mailbox should be. My place sat on the shore of Lake Kepler. The road in Kepler Road crossed my land. The lake frontage was mine too, deeded and taxed and painfully paid for. One road in, one road out, and every foot of it legal. Cheryl flipped open the folder with a little flourish and tapped a page like she was presenting a murder weapon to a jury. She said they'd received multiple complaints about the condition of my property. My woodpile was unsightly. My roof was a hazard. My sign at the road was non-compliant with Silver Pines aesthetic regulations. I just stared at her for a second. Then I said, "I don't live in Silver Pines." She didn't blink. "That's where you're mistaken. The HOA board voted last month to expand the association jurisdiction. Your property now falls within our boundaries." I actually laughed. Not a polite laugh either. The real kind, the kind that jumps out of you when somebody says something so stupid your brain rejects it on impact. You can't vote to take over somebody else's land. She kept turning pages like she hadn't heard me. Said they'd issued a formal violation notice. Said if I didn't comply within 30 days, they'd begin eviction proceedings. Eviction proceedings from my own cabin. I remember looking past her shoulder at the lake just to make sure the world was still there, and I hadn't slipped into some fever dream brought on by too much sun and not enough lunch. Then I looked back at her and said, "You understand this whole lake is private, right? And the only road your neighborhood uses to reach the backside crosses my land." She smiled at me the way people smile at children who are wrong in public. "We had it surveyed. The road is a public easement." "No," I said, pulling out my phone, "it absolutely is not." I showed her the parcel map, the deed record, my name sitting there plain as day. Kepler Road Plot 17, privately owned by Maddox Barnes. I even showed her the lake parcel. Same story. Mine. That's when her face twitched just for a second. She recovered fast and told me I couldn't block access, that doing so would be illegal. I stepped a little closer and said, "You just threatened to evict me from my own land, Cheryl. So now I'm curious how your little kingdom functions if I close the gate at the road and put up a sign that says, 'Private access, no trespassing.'" Her whole body went stiff. That would be considered hostile action against the community. I said, "You declared war. I'm just defending my property." Then she spun around and marched back to her SUV, heels hitting gravel like little gunshots, and drove off down the only road her neighborhood had left. I watched her go and grinned because right then I knew one thing for sure. She had no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. 3 days later, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no postage, just hand-delivered arrogance. Inside was a typed notice on HOA letterhead threatening daily fines and quoting bylaws I had never signed, never seen, and never would have agreed to if you'd held a pistol to my ear. The map enclosed with it was so ridiculous I almost framed it. They'd drawn a red line around their subdivision, then ballooned it outward to swallow my cabin, the lake, and part of the forest behind me, like a drunk toddler coloring with a marker. I took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and pulled down the black binder I kept over the fridge. That binder held every piece of paper tied to my property, surveys, tax records, deed, and most important, the access document filed with the county clerk. It stated in plain English that Kepler Road from the highway to the lake was privately owned, privately maintained, and privately taxed by me. No public easement, no shared access, no mystery. Then I called Dana Corbin. Dana and I had known each other since high school, back when she used to beat half the football team in debate club and scare grown men by reading contracts for fun. She'd become a land use attorney, which turned out to be one of the handiest friendships a man could have when a deranged HOA decided to annex his life. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Got an HOA trying to claim my land." There was a pause. Then she said, "They usually harass people inside their own borders. This is new. Send me everything." I scanned the papers, emailed them over, and 20 minutes later she called back laughing, which was comforting in a very specific way. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," she said. "That expansion vote means nothing unless the county zoning board approves it, and there's no filing. They're bluffing. They want you to panic." Well, I didn't panic. I got out tools. That afternoon, I drove a steel post into the ground at the northern bend of Kepler Road, stretched a heavy chain across it, and hung a sign in the middle that said "Private Property. No HOA access without written permission." The next morning, I mounted a motion camera in a pine tree and aimed it straight at the barrier. 2 days later, the camera caught a black pickup rolling up. Out stepped a broad-shouldered guy in a polo shirt with a clipboard tucked under his arm, which in my experience is one of the most dangerous species in America. He looked at the chain for maybe 10 seconds, then pulled out a wrench and started unscrewing the post like he was changing a tire. I called the sheriff immediately. By the time I walked down there, he'd already dragged the chain aside. He looked up when I came through the trees. I said, "You picked the wrong day for this." He told me the HOA had instructed him to clear an obstruction blocking community access. I showed him the deed on my phone and said, "You are standing on private land with no court order and no permission." The deputy rolled up before he could invent a second bad excuse. Once the deputy saw my paperwork, that was the end of that. He told the clipboard cowboy he was trespassing and lucky I wasn't pressing charges. Then he helped me hook the chain back up. I stood there the whole time with my arms crossed, not saying a word, which honestly was more satisfying than yelling. That should have ended it. Of course it didn't. A week later, Cheryl filed a civil complaint in county court claiming I was blocking community access to shared recreational resources. That shared resource apparently was my lake. Her argument was that Silver Pines residents had used Lake Kepler for years and therefore had some implied right to keep doing it. Dana read the complaint, snorted once, and said, "This is insane. Implied easements don't erase written property rights. Not in this county, not in this century." We filed to dismiss. We countersued for harassment, legal fees, and interference with private property. Then I started gathering old records and statements from locals, retired fishermen folks who'd lived around Kepler longer than Cheryl had been alive. Every one of them said the same thing. The lake had always been private. The hearing was the next month. Cheryl came in with half the board behind her, all of them wearing that smug look people wear when they've mistaken confidence for evidence. The judge, a hard-eyed woman with no patience for nonsense, flipped through their filing and frowned deeper with every page. She asked Cheryl if they had proof of continuous exclusive use. No. A recorded easement. No. County approval over my parcel. No. Then the judge looked up and said, "Why are you wasting this court's time? You could have heard a pin drop on carpet." My motion to dismiss was granted on the spot. Our countersuit moved forward. 2 days later, the county zoning board publicly confirmed Silver Pines had never filed any request to expand its jurisdiction. The local paper ran the story. 2 board members resigned before the week was over. That should have ended it too. It didn't. One morning I walked out to get my mail and found my mailbox ripped clean off its post, wood-splintered tire marks deep in the ditch like somebody had backed over it more than once just to make a point. I replaced it with a steel box set in concrete and added another camera. That same night around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the live feed and saw 2 figures near the edge of my property, flashlights moving through the trees. One pointed toward the lake. The other was kneeling in the dirt. By daylight, I found bright orange paint marks on rocks, arrows on trees, and survey flags stuck along the shoreline. I called Dana. She came out in person that afternoon, which told me she was worried. But she didn't come alone. A county investigator rolled in behind her. That was the twist right there, the moment the whole thing got bigger than a petty HOA feud. The investigator officer, Laramie, was quiet, sharp-eyed, and not impressed by anybody. She photographed the flags, checked the footage, took soil samples, and finally said they were using municipal-grade survey equipment. I said, "Meaning what?" She closed her clipboard and said, "Meaning somebody is misusing public resources or somebody with county ties is helping them." 2 days later, she called back. Cheryl had hired a former county contractor who'd already been under investigation for falsifying land use records in other neighborhoods. Suddenly, this wasn't just Cheryl being power-hungry. This was fraud. Then came the fire. It started around 3 in the morning. If my smoke alarms hadn't been hardwired to a backup generator, I might not have made it out. Flames were chewing through my woodshed and crawling up the side of the cabin by the time I hit the porch. I got it under control with extinguishers and a hose, but I lost half my tools, part of the wall, and the overhang I'd built the year before. The fire marshal took one look and said arson. After that, the county locked down the road during the investigation. Cheryl was arrested first for conspiracy, fraud, and unlawful use of public resources. The board started cracking apart almost overnight. Then the fire investigation came back, and it turned out the man from the black pickup, Cheryl's nephew, vice president of the board, had been caught on a neighboring trail cam the night of the fire carrying a gas can. He got arrested too. And once law enforcement started pulling threads, the whole rotten sweater came apart. County forensic accountants found Cheryl had been funneling HOA money into a slush account. Federal investigators found fake lake access permits being sold to people who thought buying in Silver Pines meant they had rights to Kepler. That explained the strangers who'd shown up with laminated passes the previous spring, acting confused when I told them to turn around. Cheryl had literally been selling pieces of my lake she didn't own. By the time I testified in federal court, the story had gone from ridiculous to rotten. I brought my records, my footage, my tax receipts, all of it. I answered every question calmly. No drama, no shouting, just facts. That was the thing I learned through all of it, and maybe it's the ugliest little lesson in the whole mess. People like Cheryl count on normal folks getting emotional, getting sloppy, getting tired. Paper beats tantrums. Records beat lies. Calm can do things. Rage never will. The verdicts came down after 3 weeks. Cheryl got 11 years in federal prison. Her nephew got 8. The others got 5 and 6. Restitution was ordered for more than $600,000 in fraud. Silver Pines never recovered. The HOA was dissolved. Lawsuits flew from inside the neighborhood itself. Homes went up for sale. Some sat empty. The county posted permanent signs at the entrance to Kepler Road, making it crystal clear that the road was private and protected by injunction. And my place, it got quiet again. I rebuilt the woodshed with fire-resistant siding. I added a second battery for the cameras, a stronger gate, another lockdown by the lakeshore trail. Dana came by one evening with a bottle of bourbon and that old grin of hers and said, "Not bad for a guy who just wanted to stack firewood." I clinked my glass against hers and said, "They thought they could rewrite the rules." Turns out I owned the paper. Later that winter, after the snow came down thick and clean across the pines, a woman in her 60s stopped at my gate. She didn't try to open it. She just waited until I walked down. She handed me an envelope with one of the fake lake passes inside and a note saying she and her husband had bought in Silver Pines, thinking they'd spend retirement fishing there. She told me they hadn't known what Cheryl was doing. Said not everybody in that neighborhood had been part of it. I believed her. That night I tossed the fake pass into the fire pit and watched it curl up black at the edges. The plastic warped, the ink ran, and for a second it smelled sweet and ugly, like cheap fraud burning off into cold air. I stood there listening to the wood pop and the lake breathe in the dark, and I felt that slow kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from revenge, not exactly. More from seeing a lie finally run out of places to hide. They tried to bully me with paper, then with threats, then with vandalism, then with fire. In the end, the same road they tried to steal became the road deputies used to haul them out. So here's what I want to ask you, because I still think about it sometimes when the water's flat and the trees go quiet, when someone abuses a little power for so long they start believing they own other people's lives. What counts as justice? And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor, an HOA, or anybody else who thought your patience meant weakness, tell me what happened and whether you think I was right to lock that gate the minute they crossed the line.